There are wounds that time doesn't heal. It only teaches us to live with them. Silence can be a prison or a fortress, depending on who holds the key. And I, for almost 5 decades, was the sole guardian of my secrets. Good morning, my dear ones. I'm Helena Grace Thompson. I'm 79 years old, and today I decided to open my heart to share a story I've kept buried for longer than many of you have been alive. A story about love, betrayal, and most importantly, about how I found the strength to start over when everything seemed lost. I was born in 1946 in a small town called Cedar Falls in rural Iowa. It was a simple place where everyone knew each other, and gossip traveled faster than the wind through the cornfields that surrounded our small community. My parents, Robert and Mary, were simple, hard-working people. Dad was a carpenter, one of those who made furniture so beautiful that even the wealthiest families in town would place orders. Mom took care of the house and supplemented our income by making pies that she sold at the Sunday farmers market. I grew up between the smell of sawdust and apple cinnamon, a simple childhood, but full of love. Our house sat on a small lot, but Mom worked miracles in that backyard. We had apple trees, cherry trees, a small herb garden with mint and basil that perfumed the air on warm mornings. The chickens roamed freely and would occasionally hide to brood eggs away from our watchful eyes. It was a modest life, but we never lacked the essentials. We were 3 siblings, me, the youngest, Samuel, the oldest, who followed in my father's footsteps in carpentry, and Grace, the middle child, who married young and moved to Chicago. From an early age, I was different from the others. A dreamer, restless, always with a book under my arm. At school, teacher Mrs. Matthews said I had big bird wings, that I wouldn't be content with Cedar Falls' limited horizon. And I truly wasn't content. At 18, against my father's wishes, but with my mother's silent support, I went to study in Des Moines. I got a spot in the teaching program, and a distant cousin took me in at her house near downtown. I remember as if it were yesterday, the day I got on that Greyhound bus, with a cardboard suitcase tied with rope, and my eyes burning from crying so much during the goodbye. My mother gave me a blue rosary that had belonged to my grandmother and whispered, "Go with God, my daughter, but remember that home's door is always open for you to come back." Des Moines swallowed me whole. The big city was everything I had imagined and more. The wide streets, the buildings that seemed to touch the sky, the buses always full, the noise that never ceased. In the first days I felt small, scared, like a fish out of water. But soon I adapted. The teaching program was my dream come true. I had always wanted to be a teacher, ever since I helped the younger children with their lessons back in Cedar Falls. Those were 2 intense years, studying in the morning and working as a babysitter in the afternoon to help with expenses. I graduated in 1966, full of dreams and plans. I got a job as an elementary teacher at a public school on the outskirts of town. The salary was modest, but it gave me independence. I rented a small room in a boarding house for young women and began my life as an independent woman, something rare for that time. It was at that school that I met Carmen, a fellow teacher who would become my great friend. Carmen was different from me in almost everything, outgoing, full of life, always ready for an adventure. She was the one who convinced me, during the July vacation of 1968, to take a trip to Lake Michigan in northern Illinois. "We need to see the lake, Helena. You can't stay buried in this concrete city during vacation." Oh, my dear ones, if I could go back in time and tell young Helena what that trip would represent. But life doesn't give us those chances, does it? And maybe it's better that way. If we knew the future, we'd lose the courage to live it. Lake Michigan was paradise. The water so blue it hurt your eyes, the sandy beaches, the smell of fresh lake air that permeated everything. We stayed at a small inn near the shore, run by an elderly German couple. In the mornings, we walked on the sand, collecting shells. In the afternoons, we swam in the lake and laughed like children when the waves knocked us down. At night, we went to the small town center, where there was a little bar with live music. It was on one of those nights that I saw Mark for the first time. He was sitting with friends at a table near ours, a tall young man with wavy brown hair and a smile that lit up his whole face. Our eyes met several times, and each time I felt my face heat up. Carmen, noticing my interest, didn't waste time. With her characteristic spontaneity, she soon struck up a conversation with his group, and before I knew it, we were all sitting together, talking like old friends. Mark was 25, had a degree in agriculture from Iowa State, and worked on his family's lands near Ames. He was at the lake for a brief rest with friends before taking on new projects on his father's farm. He spoke passionately about farming techniques, about the changes he wanted to implement, about his vision for more modern agriculture. His eyes shone when he talked about the future, and I found myself enchanted not just by his looks, but by his intelligence and enthusiasm. That night stretched until the early morning hours. When we said goodbye, Mark asked for my address in Des Moines, promising to write. I returned to the inn floating, ignoring Carmen's teasing comments. "Look at the proper teacher, falling for a farmer," she joked. Vacation ended, we returned to routine in Des Moines, and I tried not to create expectations. After all, promises made on summer nights rarely come true in the cold reality of everyday life. But to my surprise, 2 weeks later, I received the first letter from Mark. It was a long letter, full of details about his life in Ames, about his projects, his hopes, and it ended with a request. Could he visit me in Des Moines the following weekend? Oh, my dear ones, you can't imagine how my heart raced reading those words. If you're following my story so far, make this old lady happy and leave in the comments where you're watching from. This elderly woman here is curious to know how far my voice is reaching. And if you can, please leave a like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. It helps much more than you imagine an almost 80-year-old lady to continue sharing her stories. Where was I? Ah, yes, Mark's letter. I replied the same day with an enthusiastic yes, but trying to seem restrained. Carmen helped me choose the outfit for the date. A light blue dress, simple but elegant, which she insisted matched my eyes. I spent the whole week in a mixture of anxiety and expectation, counting the days, the hours. Our first date in Des Moines was on a sunny Sunday in August. Mark showed up at the agreed address punctually with a bouquet of daisies in his hands. To this day, I don't know how he discovered they were my favorite flowers. We went to Grays Lake Park, walked for hours, talking as if we'd known each other for years. He told me about his family, about how he had returned to Ames after college to help his father with the business, even though he had received offers to work for large agricultural companies. He spoke of his mother, a discreet and religious lady, of his younger brother who was studying medicine in Chicago. I, always reserved, surprised myself by talking about my dreams, about how I wanted to make a difference in the lives of the children I taught, many of them from very poor families. I told him about my childhood in Cedar Falls, about my parents, about the decision to come to the capital in search of opportunities. I spoke of my fears and hopes with a frankness I had never had with anyone. That Sunday turned into many others. Mark began coming to Des Moines almost every weekend. We went to movies, to art exhibits at the Civic Center, to concerts at the community theater when we could get cheap tickets, or we simply stayed at the small diner near my boarding house, drinking coffee and talking for hours. In a few months, I was completely in love. It was in December, during a walk in the sculpture park, that Mark held my hands and asked the question that would change my life. "Helena, would you accept meeting my family? I want to introduce you to my parents." The proposal caught me by surprise. Meeting the parents was an important step. It meant our relationship was getting serious. I accepted, of course, with a mixture of joy and apprehension. How would I be received? Me, a simple public school teacher in the home of a traditional farming family. "They're going to love you," Mark assured me, kissing my forehead. "How could they not? You're perfect." Christmas was approaching, and we arranged that I would spend the holiday in Ames with his family. I told my parents the news by letter, without going into many details, just saying I had met a special young man and was going to meet his family. Mom replied with a letter full of advice and recommendations, ending with, "May Our Lady watch over you, my daughter." The week before the trip, Carmen helped me choose a gift for Mark's parents, a fine china tea set, an item that cost almost half my salary, but that needed to be perfect. I also bought a new dress, shoes, even white gloves that Carmen insisted were essential to make a good impression. "Remember to be yourself, but also to respect their traditions," she advised, while helping me pack my small suitcase. Traditional families have their codes, They're unwritten rules. I'll never forget the sensation when the bus began climbing toward Ames. The landscape changing, different trees from what I was used to. My stomach felt full of butterflies. My hands sweated despite the cold. Mark was waiting for me at the bus station, with that smile that made my heart race. "Are you nervous?" he asked, while putting my suitcase in the car trunk. "A little," I admitted. "What if they don't like me?" "Impossible not to like you," he replied, with that confidence that always impressed me. "My father is eager to meet you. I've talked about you so much that he said he's curious to know if you're real or if I invented you." The drive to the Whitmore farm was long, on dirt roads that cut through immense properties. Green fields stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with old trees and occasional farm worker houses. The magnitude of those lands impressed me. It was a world completely different from mine. When we finally arrived, I almost lost my breath. The farmhouse was a mansion in colonial style, with a wide porch that surrounded the entire structure, tall windows, an impeccably maintained garden in front. It looked like something out of a movie, one of those we watched at the cinema on Sundays. "Welcome to Whitmore Farm," said Mark, and only then did I notice we both shared the name Helena with the farm. His great-grandmother had been named Helena, too. Seems like it was destined, doesn't it? I got out of the car with trembling legs, nervously adjusting my dress. On the porch, a couple watched us. The man, tall and imposing, with graying hair and erect posture, could only be Mark's father. Next to him, a lady of fragile appearance, hair pulled back in an elegant bun, a discreet but clearly expensive dress. I swallowed hard and forced a smile as Mark led me to them. "Dad, Mom, this is Helena," Mark introduced, placing his hand on my waist in a protective gesture. "Helena, these are my parents, Augustus and Elizabeth Whitmore." "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Helena," said Mr. Augustus, extending his hand. His voice was deep, the handshake too firm, almost hurting. His eyes, the same brown as Mark's, examined me with disconcerting intensity. "Mark talks about you a lot. Says you're the most dedicated teacher in Des Moines." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Whitmore," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thank you for the invitation to spend Christmas with you." Mrs. Elizabeth just nodded, a polite but distant smile on her lips. "Welcome to our home, dear. You must be tired from the trip. I asked Rose to prepare the guest room for you." I was led inside the house, which was even more impressive inside. Antique furniture that looked like family heirlooms, Persian rugs, oil paintings on the walls, a dark wooden staircase leading to the upper floor. Everything exuded tradition, wealth, family history. The room prepared for me was larger than the entire apartment I shared with Carmen in Des Moines. A canopy bed, a carved mahogany wardrobe, a vanity with an oval mirror, lace curtains on windows that looked out to the back gardens. I felt displaced, as if I had entered a world that didn't belong to me. After freshening up and changing clothes, I went down for dinner. The dining room was equally impressive, with a long table that could easily accommodate 20 people. But there were only 4 of us. Mr. Augustus at the head, Mrs. Elizabeth to his right, Mark to his left, and me next to Mark. Dinner was served by 2 silent maids who moved like shadows through the room. Fine china plates, silver cutlery, crystal glasses. I was unsure which fork to use first, and discreetly watched Mark to imitate his movements. The conversation during dinner was led mainly by Mr. Augustus. He asked questions about my work, my family, my studies. I answered politely, trying to sound more sophisticated than I really was, conscious of the silent judgment in his eyes. "So your parents are from Cedar Falls?" "I know the region. Fertile land, but poorly utilized," he commented at one point. "Is your father a landowner?" "No, sir," I replied, feeling my face heat up. "My father is a carpenter. We only own the house where we live." An uncomfortable silence followed my answer. I saw Mrs. Elizabeth cast a quick glance at her husband, something I couldn't decipher. "Carpenter? Honest work?" Mr. Augustus finally said. But there was something in his tone that made me feel like he was granting a great generosity by saying that. "And you, being a teacher, certainly elevated the family status. It's admirable." I didn't know how to respond to that. I felt Mark's hand squeeze mine under the table, a gesture of silent support. Helena is brilliant, Dad, Mark intervened. Her students adore her. She makes a difference in those children's lives. I'm sure she does, Mr. Augustus replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Education is fundamental, even for the more simple ones. The rest of dinner passed with superficial conversations about the weather, Christmas festivities, farm projects. I noticed that Mark spoke differently with his parents, more formal, more contained, without the spontaneity he showed when we were alone. I also noticed how he rarely disagreed with his father, even when Mr. Augustus expressed opinions that I knew Mark didn't agree with. After dinner, the men retired to the study for brandy, while I stayed in the living room with Mrs. Elizabeth. It was the first time we were alone, and for a few minutes, an uncomfortable silence hung between us. "Helena," she finally said, her voice soft but firm, "I see that my son is very enchanted with you." "I'm also enchanted with him, Mrs. Whitmore," I replied sincerely. "Yes, I imagine you are." She studied me for a moment before continuing. "Mark is a special young man, the only son I have left since we lost William to scarlet fever when he was a child. You understand his importance to our family, don't you?" "Of course," I replied, not understanding exactly where she was going with this. "The Whitmores have traditions, Helena, values we've preserved for generations. We are one of the founding families of this region, did you know? Our name carries weight, responsibility." She paused, as if carefully choosing her next words. "A Whitmore wife has specific duties. The main one is absolute loyalty to the family. Do you understand what I'm saying?" A chill ran down my spine. There was something in her words, in her look, that left me deeply uncomfortable. But I smiled and nodded, not wanting to seem rude. "I think so, Mrs. Elizabeth. Every family has its traditions." "Exactly," she smiled, seeming satisfied with my answer. "And the most important of all is that, in this family, we respect the patriarch's authority. Augustus is a man of vision who built all this. His word is final in all matters. A good Whitmore wife understands this and never, ever questions that authority. That's how we maintain harmony, prosperity." Before I could respond, Mark and his father returned to the room. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, and soon we said goodnight. As I went upstairs to my room, Mrs. Elizabeth's words echoed in my mind. There was something about them that bothered me deeply, but in my naivety, I interpreted them as just outdated advice from a traditional lady. That was the first of many visits to Whitmore Farm. In the months that followed, Mark and I grew closer and closer. He came to Des Moines almost every weekend, and I occasionally went to Ames. With each visit, I felt a little more part of that world, even if never completely comfortable. Mr. Augustus continued to treat me with a mixture of condescension and constant evaluation, while Mrs. Elizabeth intensified her advice about how to be a good wife. "A Whitmore wife always dresses appropriately, even at home," she would say, while showing me the rose garden she cultivated. "Always behaves with decorum, never raises her voice, never contradicts her husband in public." Or, "A woman's place is beside her husband, supporting his decisions, creating a harmonious home where he can rest from the pressures of the world." I listened politely, sometimes agreeing, sometimes changing the subject. Deep down, I thought it was all antiquated, the product of a different generation. I was sure that Mark didn't expect that kind of submission from me. After all, he valued my independence, my career, my opinions. When we were alone in Des Moines, we were equal partners, discussing books, politics, the future. But increasingly, I noticed how Mark changed when we were at the farm, how he transformed in his father's presence, becoming almost a different person. The progressive young man who defended agricultural reforms in our conversations in Des Moines would fall silent when his father spoke of land invasions by communists. The man who respected my opinions and valued my independence seemed to silently agree when his mother spoke about a woman's place. One night, after a particularly tense dinner, where Mr. Augustus had made derogatory comments about my work with underprivileged children. "You waste your talent on those boys who will never amount to anything, Helena," I confronted Mark in the garden. "Why don't you ever disagree with your father, even when he says things I know you don't believe?" Mark sighed, running his hand through his hair. a gesture I already knew, which indicated his discomfort. "You don't understand how things work here, Helena. My father, he's a difficult man, but wise in his own way. He built all this from nothing. He deserves respect." "Respect doesn't mean agreeing with everything, Mark. In Des Moines, you have such different opinions. Des Moines is Des Moines. Here is different." He held my hands, his look pleading. "Please, Helena, understand. Here at home, my father's word comes first. You need to understand this to be happy with us." That phrase should have been a warning, a bright red signal on my path. But I was so in love, so blinded by what I believed was love, that I interpreted it as just another peculiarity of that traditional family. I believed that when we had our own house, our own life, this dynamic would be left behind. How foolish I was. How dangerously naive. In March 1969, Mark proposed to me. It was on a Sunday, on the same bench in Grayslake Park, where we had our first date in Des Moines. He knelt in front of me, took out a little velvet box from his pocket, and inside was a diamond ring that certainly cost more than everything I owned. "Helena Grace," he said, with that smile that still made my heart race, "would you make me the happiest man in the world by accepting to be my wife?" I said yes, without hesitation, tears streaming down my face, my heart overflowing with happiness. At that moment, everything seemed perfect, the future bright and promising. Mark talked about our plans. We would live in a house on the property, but separate from the main house. I could continue teaching, maybe at a school in Ames. We would have children, a happy life. In the weeks that followed, I was swept into a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Mrs. Elizabeth took control of practically everything. The ceremony would be in the farm's chapel, the reception in the gardens. The dress would be made by the region's most renowned seamstress. I tried to give my opinion, but my wishes were subtly ignored or modified to fit Whitmore tradition. "Dear, trust me," Mrs. Elizabeth would say when I questioned some decision. "I know exactly what's best for a Whitmore wedding. It's important to do everything correctly." My parents, when I formally introduced them to Mark's family, seemed small and displaced in the grandeur of the farm. Dad, always so confident in his carpentry, seemed to shrink in Mr. Augustus's presence. Mom, nervous, almost dropped her teacup. But they were polite, grateful for the good match I had made, dazzled by the wealth and status of the family I was about to join. "Your daughter is taking a big step, Mr. Robert," said Mr. Augustus, with that same condescending tone he used with me. "The Whitmores always take care of their own. She'll never have to worry about anything again." The closer the big day got, the more an uneasiness grew inside me. I tried to ignore it, attributing it to a bride's natural nervousness. But there was something more, something I couldn't name, a premonition trying to warn me. On the eve of the wedding, during dinner at the farm, I noticed something strange. A look exchanged between Mr. Augustus and Mark, something I couldn't decipher. And then Mr. Augustus made a toast that, at the time, just seemed too formal. "To Helena, who tomorrow will become a true Whitmore. May she honor our traditions and understand her place in our family." When I raised my glass, my eyes met Mrs. Elizabeth's. There was something in her look, sadness, pity, that for a moment left me cold. But then Mark squeezed my hand under the table, and I pushed away that disturbing feeling. The big day arrived, sunny and perfect. The chapel was decorated with white flowers. The guests, mostly friends and family of the Whitmores, filled the wooden pews. My dress, a traditional model with lace and pearls, made me look like a fairy tale princess. I walked down the aisle to the sound of the organ, arm in arm with my father, who seemed about to cry with pride. Mark waited for me at the altar, handsome in his dark suit, his eyes shining when he saw me. Everything seemed like a dream, the pinnacle of happiness. What I didn't know, while we exchanged vows and rings, was that that day would mark not the beginning of a fairy tale, but the start of my nightmare. A nightmare that would begin just a few hours later, when we were finally alone as husband and wife. But that, my dear ones, is a part of the story that I need a little more courage to tell. A part that, for almost 50 years, I kept only to myself, locked in the darkest basement of my memory. The wedding reception was splendid, like everything the Whitmores did. Elegantly decorated tables scattered throughout the farm gardens, white orchids in sophisticated arrangements, French champagne served in crystal glasses, a buffet that mixed traditional American dishes with international delicacies. The guests, more than 300 most unknown to me, circulated through the space, men in impeccable suits, women in dresses that certainly cost a fortune. Amidst all that luxury, my family seemed even more displaced. My father, uncomfortable in the only suit he owned, already a bit worn at the elbows. My mother, in the navy blue dress she had made especially for the occasion, timidly touching the glasses as if afraid of breaking them. My brother Samuel and his wife, sitting in a corner, talking only to each other. The few friends I had invited, Carmen and some teacher colleagues, looked around impressed, almost intimidated by so much opulence. During the party, I was introduced to dozens of people whose names I couldn't remember. Distant relatives of the Whitmores, family friends, business partners, local politicians. They all greeted me with the same phrase, "Welcome to the family, Helena. It's an honor to receive you among us," as if I were being admitted to some kind of exclusive club, a closed circle to which few had access. Mr. Augustus circulated among the guests like a king in his court, receiving congratulations, distributing firm handshakes, occasionally touching my shoulder when introducing me to someone important. "This is Helena, the new Mrs. Whitmore," he would say, with a pride that seemed more related to his surname than to me. Mrs. Elizabeth, always elegant in her champagne dress, stayed close to her husband, smiling politely, intervening only when necessary. I observed how she never contradicted him, how her gaze sought approval before each statement. At that moment, I still didn't realize I was seeing a mirror of what they expected me to become. Mark seemed radiant. He received congratulations enthusiastically, chatted animatedly, introduced me with pride. Occasionally, he came to me, kissed my hand or my cheek, whispered that I was beautiful, that he was the happiest man in the world. In his eyes, I saw love, admiration, desire. The party extended until sunset. When the sun began to set, painting the sky with orange and pink tones, Mark discreetly led me inside the house. "It's time for us to retire," he said, with a smile that mixed expectation and nervousness. "Tomorrow we leave early for Niagara Falls for our honeymoon." We went up the stairs that led to the upper floor of the main house together. We wouldn't go to the promised house on the property. That was still under renovation. Wouldn't be ready before our return from the honeymoon. For now, we would stay in a room in the main mansion, Mark's old room, now adapted for the couple. The room was spacious, decorated in shades of green and gold. A king-size bed dominated the space, covered with Egyptian cotton sheets and an embroidered silk bedspread. Large windows looked out to the back gardens, now illuminated only by the decorative lights from the party continuing below. I stood in the middle of the room, suddenly shy. It was our wedding night, the moment every bride dreams of. Mark approached, hugged me from behind, his lips brushing my neck. "Finally alone," he murmured, his hands finding my waist. "I can barely believe you're my wife now." I turned in his arms, meeting his lips with mine. The kiss began gentle, then became more intense, full of promises of what was to come. Mark began to undo the small buttons on the back of my dress, his fingers trembling with anticipation. That's when we heard it, a knock on the door, firm, authoritative. Mark froze, his hands still on my back. I saw an immediate change in his face. Desire replaced by something that looked like fear? "Who is it?" I asked, confused. "My father," Mark replied, his voice suddenly tense. He stepped away from me, adjusting his tie, running his hands through his hair. "Wait here." He went to the door, opened it just enough to talk to whoever was on the other side. I heard murmurs, couldn't distinguish the words. When Mark turned to me again, his face was pale, tense. "Helena," he said, his voice strangely formal. "My father would like to talk to us. An important matter." "Now? On our wedding night?" Mark just nodded, his eyes avoiding mine. He opened the door completely, and Mr. Augustus entered the room. He still wore the dark suit from the party, but had removed his tie. His eyes swept the environment, noticing the partially open dress on my back, the still untouched bed. "Good evening, Helena," he said, with that deep voice that always caused me inexplicable discomfort. "I apologize for interrupting, but there's a matter that needs to be addressed before you proceed. I nervously adjusted my dress, feeling exposed, vulnerable. Of course, Mr. Augustus. What is it about? He walked around the room, hands behind his back, as if inspecting the place. He stopped by the window, looking at the gardens below before turning to us. Helena, you are now a Whitmore, and being a Whitmore means honoring traditions that go back generations. His voice was calm, measured, but there was something in it that made me shiver. Some of these traditions may seem antiquated by modern standards, but they are what keep us strong, united as a family. I looked at Mark, seeking some explanation, but he kept his eyes fixed on the floor, his hands slightly trembling at his sides. Mr. Augustus, I began, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. It's simple, my dear. He approached, stopping just a few steps from me. His strong cologne, a mixture of expensive aftershave and the cigar he usually smoked after meals, invaded my nostrils. In the Whitmore family, there exists a tradition that goes back to the first days of this farm. A tradition that symbolizes the continuity of the lineage, the transfer of power, the loyalty of the new generation to the old. My heart accelerated, a terrible premonition beginning to form. What tradition? That's when Mr. Augustus placed his hand on my face, a touch that should have seemed paternal, but that caused me immediate revulsion. The patriarch of the family has the right and duty to be the first to receive the new woman who enters the Whitmore clan. The air seemed to disappear from my lungs. For a moment I thought I had heard wrong, that I was misunderstanding his words. I looked at Mark, expecting him to laugh, to say it was some kind of bizarre joke. But Mark wasn't laughing. His face was a mask of resignation, shame, silent acceptance. This is absurd, I managed to say finally, taking a step back, moving away from Mr. Augustus's touch. You can't be serious. Helena, Mark's voice sounded strangely distant. Please, understand. It's just a tradition. It happened with my mother, with my grandmother, with all the women who entered the family. It's how things are done here. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked from one to the other, seeking any sign that this was a cruel joke, a bizarre test of loyalty. Mark, my voice came out as a desperate whisper. You can't agree with this. You can't expect me to. It's just one night, Helena, he replied, still without looking me in the eyes. After that, it'll be just us two, forever. Please, don't make this harder. I felt tears burning my eyes, bile rising in my throat. In that moment, I realized the extent of the trap I had fallen into. Mrs. Elizabeth's words about traditions and loyalty to the family took on a terrible, crystal-clear meaning. The looks exchanged during dinner on the eve of the wedding. The insistence that I understand my place in the family. I won't do this, I declared, my voice finally finding some firmness. This is sick. It's criminal. I'm leaving here right now. I took a step toward the door, but Mr. Augustus was faster. He grabbed my arm with enough force to leave marks, his fingers digging into my skin. I think you didn't understand, my dear, he said, his voice now losing its smoothness, taking on a hard, almost cruel tone. It's not a matter of choice. It's a matter of honor, of duty. If you refuse, you'll be dishonoring not only me, but Mark, the entire Whitmore family. Think carefully if that's what you want on your first day as a wife. I looked at Mark, pleading. Please, don't let this happen. Help me. But Mark just looked away, a solitary tear rolling down his face. I'm sorry, Helena. It's just one night. After that, I promise, we'll be happy, as we planned. In that moment, I understood the extent of Mark's cowardice, the corruption of that family, the trap I had fallen into for love. I realized that the man I thought I knew, the man I had loved, was just a facade, an illusion that was crumbling before my eyes. I'll leave you alone for a few minutes, said Mr. Augustus, releasing my arm. So you can talk. I'll be back soon, and I hope to find a more understanding bride. He left the room, closing the door softly behind him. As soon as we were alone, I turned to Mark, rage, disappointment, horror overflowing in tears. How could you? How could you bring me to this? Let me get this far without telling me. I wanted to tell you. he murmured, still without looking me in the eyes. But I knew you wouldn't understand, that you might give up the wedding. And I love you so much, Helena. I couldn't lose you. Love? The word came out like an accusation. This isn't love, Mark. Love protects, respects, honors. What you're doing is collaborating with a crime. It's not a crime, it's a tradition, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. All the women in the family went through this. My mother, my aunts, my female cousins when they married. And that makes it right? All these women were... I couldn't even complete the sentence, the horror of the realization suffocating me. It was just once, Mark continued, as if trying to convince himself as much as me. After that, they had normal, happy lives. Families, children. How can you know if they were happy? Have you ever asked them? Have you ever seen in their eyes when they look at your father, at their husbands who didn't protect them? Mark finally raised his gaze, his red eyes meeting mine. What do you want me to do, Helena? He's my father. He's the head of the family. Everything we have, everything we are, we owe to him. I want you to be a man, I screamed, not caring if anyone would hear. I want you to protect me, to respect me enough not to hand me over like an object to your father. There was a long silence after that. Mark seemed to be fighting an internal battle, his face contorted in an expression of agony. For a moment, I thought I saw a glimpse of courage in his eyes, a spark of indignation. But then his shoulders fell, defeated. I'm sorry, Helena, he said finally. I really am. But this is how things are in the Whitmore family. Always have been, always will be. Please don't make this harder than it already is. In that moment, something died inside me. The love I felt, the admiration, the respect, everything turned to ash. I looked at the man in front of me and saw not the Mark I had loved, but a stranger, an accomplice, a coward. Get out, I said, my voice strangely calm now. Get out of this room. Helena, please, get out. He hesitated for a moment, then walked slowly to the door. Before leaving, he turned one last time. He's going to come back, Helena, and if you refuse, I don't know what might happen. My father isn't used to hearing no. After Mark left, I was alone in the room, my mind working frantically. I needed to escape from there. But how? We were isolated on the farm, miles from the nearest town. I didn't have enough money, didn't know the region, had nowhere to go. And downstairs, the party continued. Hundreds of people celebrating my wedding, including my parents, who had probably already retired to their guest room on the other side of the property. I looked around, desperate for some exit, some weapon, some way to protect myself. That's when I noticed, on the vanity, small scissors that had been used by the maid to adjust my veil before the ceremony. I picked them up, feeling the cold weight of the metal in my hand. It wasn't much, but it was something. I heard footsteps in the hallway. The doorknob turned slowly. The door opened. Mr. Augustus entered, now without his jacket, just in his white shirt partially unbuttoned. There was a smile on his lips that chilled me to the bone. So, Helena, he said, closing the door behind him, did you have time to reflect? To understand the importance of this moment for the family? I gripped the scissors tighter, hiding them in the folds of my dress. I won't do this, I declared, my voice surprisingly firm. No matter what you say, what you threaten, I'm not an object you can claim as some kind of feudal right. He laughed, a sound that sent shivers through me. Mark said you were polite, intelligent. That makes everything more interesting. He took a step toward me. But in the end, my dear, they all give in. They all understand that it's easier to accept than to fight. I took a step back, feeling the edge of the bed against my legs. Stay away from me. Or what? He advanced more, now just an arm's length away. Are you going to scream? And who will come? Mark? He knows what's happening here. Everyone knows. And everyone accepts, because that's how things are in the Whitmore family. In that moment, an icy clarity took hold of me. I realized he was right. No one would come to my rescue. I was alone against a system that had existed for generations, a system of abuse and silence that had corrupted everyone around it. Now, be a good girl and make things easy, he continued, extending his hand to touch my face. I promise to be gentle, if you cooperate. That's when I pulled the scissors from their hiding place among the folds of my dress. Touch me, And I swear I'll drive this into your neck." His eyes widened momentarily, not with fear, but with surprise. Then they narrowed dangerously. "You really don't understand who you're dealing with, do you? Think a sewing scissors will stop me?" He advanced suddenly, grabbing my wrist with brutal force, twisting until the scissors fell to the floor with a metallic noise. The pain brought tears to my eyes, but I refused to cry, to show weakness. "You can force me," I said, looking him directly in the eyes, "but know that the moment you do, I'll no longer be a Whitmore. The moment you lay hands on me, you'll make your son a widower." He stopped, his hand still squeezing my wrist. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'll kill myself," I replied, my voice trembling but determined. "If you touch me, I swear by my grandmother's memory that I'll kill myself tonight. And everyone will know why. I'll write in my blood if necessary, so everyone knows what kind of tradition you maintain." Something changed in his look, a calculation being made, a risk being assessed. Finally, he released my wrist, taking a step back. "You have courage, I must admit. More than I expected." He studied me for a long moment, as if seeing me for the first time. "Perhaps there's another way to resolve this." "There's nothing to resolve," I replied, rubbing my sore wrist. "There will be no agreement, no negotiation. Either you leave this room now, or tomorrow they'll be burying your son and his wife." A tense silence stretched between us. I could see the anger in his eyes, the incredulity of someone who wasn't used to having his will crossed. But I also saw something more, a cold, pragmatic calculation. "Very well," he said finally. "Tonight, you won. But remember, Helena, you are now part of this family. And sooner or later, you'll understand that no one challenges the Whitmores without consequences." With that, he left the room, closing the door forcefully behind him. As soon as I was alone, my legs weakened. I fell sitting on the bed, shaking uncontrollably, adrenaline leaving my body and leaving only exhaustion and horror. I don't know how long I stayed like that, paralyzed, trying to process what had just happened, what had almost happened. When the door opened again, I jumped, ready to fight again. But it was Mark who entered, his face pale, his eyes red from crying. "Helena," he began, his voice almost a whisper. "Are you okay? My father said you two talked." "Talked?" I laughed, a hysterical sound I didn't recognize as mine. "Is that what you call what happened here? A conversation? He said that you threatened to kill yourself. And I did, and I would have followed through. Do you know me so little, Mark? Do you think I would submit to that? That I would accept being raped as part of some sick tradition?" He approached, hesitant, as if fearing my reaction. "Helena, I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't know you would react like this, that it would be so difficult." "Difficult?" The word came out like an accusation. "You think it was difficult for me to be almost raped by your father on my wedding night, with your complicity?" Mark shrank as if he had been slapped. "It wasn't how I saw it. It wasn't what God, Helena, all the other women in the family accepted. I never thought you would be different." "So you really believe they accepted? That they weren't coerced, threatened, forced like I almost was? Look at your mother, Mark. Look in her eyes and tell me she accepted willingly." A heavy silence fell between us. Mark seemed to be seeing something for the first time, as if a blindfold had been removed from his eyes. "What do we do now?" he asked finally. "There is no we after this, Mark. There is no now. It's over. Tomorrow morning, I'm leaving here and never looking back." "You can't leave," he said, a tone of desperation in his voice. "You're my wife now, legally, before God. A paper and some words mean nothing after what happened tonight. The marriage wasn't consummated. It will be annulled." "My father will never allow it," he warned, his eyes wide. He has influence, power. He can make your life impossible." "Let him try," I replied, a new determination growing inside me. "I'd rather face his wrath as a free woman than live a single day as a slave in this house." Mark seemed defeated, lost. He ran his hands over his face, through his hair, as if searching for a solution that didn't exist. "What should I tell him? Tell everyone? Say whatever you want. Say I'm crazy, hysterical, ungrateful. I don't care anymore what you or your family think of me." He nodded slowly, as if accepting the inevitability of the situation. "I'll sleep in another room tonight. In the morning we'll resolve this." After he left, I locked the door and pushed a heavy dresser against it. I didn't trust anyone in that house, much less the locks that could have several copies of keys circulating. I spent the night awake, sitting in a chair near the window, the small scissors firmly held in my hand. I didn't cry. There weren't enough tears to express what I felt. The betrayal, the horror, the cold rage that now occupied the place where love once existed. Instead, I planned. I thought of every step I would take the next morning, how I would escape from that place, how I would rebuild my life after that terrible night. When the first rays of sun began to illuminate the room, I got up from the chair. I was sore, exhausted, but determined. I changed out of the wedding dress, now a symbol of lies and betrayal, into the simplest dress I found in the suitcase I had brought. I gathered my few personal belongings, leaving behind everything I had received from the Whitmores: the engagement ring, the jewelry, the gifts. I didn't want anything that would remind me of them, nothing that would connect me to that family. I took a deep breath, gathering all the courage I possessed. I knew what was coming next wouldn't be easy. I would have to face not only Mr. Augustus and Mark, but also the shame, the questions, the looks. I would have to explain to my parents, my friends, why I was abandoning my marriage the day after the ceremony. But none of that mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was my freedom, my dignity, my right to determine my own destiny. And for that, I was willing to fight with all my strength. I moved the dresser away from the door, unlocked it, and went out into the hallway. The house was still silent, most of the guests probably still sleeping after the long party. I went down the stairs silently, determined to find someone who could take me back to town, back to my life, away from that nightmare I had lived. I didn't know then that my fight was just beginning, that the worst was still to come, that escaping from Whitmore Farm would be just the first step in a long and painful journey back to myself. I went down the stairs of the Whitmore mansion that morning with a heavy heart, but determination burning in my chest. The simple dress I wore felt like armor compared to the delicate wedding dress from the night before. Now I was no longer a dreaming bride, but a woman ready to fight for her dignity. The house still slept when I reached the entrance hall. Only one maid, a middle-aged woman named Dolores whom I barely knew, was mopping the marble floor. She raised her eyes, surprised to see me coming down so early, dressed like that, with a small suitcase in hand. "Ma'am?" she asked, confused. "Do you need something?" "I need to get out of here," I replied directly. "Is there a car, some driver who could take me to the bus station in Ames?" She looked me up and down, understanding slowly emerging in her tired eyes. I don't know what she saw in me at that moment. Maybe the poorly disguised desperation, maybe the red eyes from a sleepless night, maybe something deeper, a silent recognition between women. "My son is outside, ma'am. He came to pick me up for church. He can take you to town." "Don't tell anyone," I asked, grabbing her arm impulsively. "Please, it's very important." She nodded once, her face impassive. "Wait in the back garden. I'll call him." I went out to the garden, the cold morning air enveloping me like an icy embrace. The sky was beginning to clear, painting the distant mountains with shades of pink and gold. In another circumstance, I would have found that landscape breathtaking, worthy of a postcard. At that moment, however, I could only see a prison from which I needed to escape. Minutes later, Dolores appeared with a young man, maybe 20 years old, of simple appearance and curious look. "This is my son, James. He'll take you wherever you want to go." "Thank you," I whispered, gratitude choking me. "I'll never forget this." We left through the back of the property, avoiding the main entrance where some guests' cars were still parked. James's car was an old Ford, blue faded, that had seen better days. But to me, at that moment, it seemed like the most luxurious vehicle in the world, my ticket out of that nightmare. During the trip to town, James didn't ask questions. Occasionally, through the rearview mirror, I saw his curious look, but he respected my silence, my pain. Only the radio playing softly filled the space between us, playing a country song that spoke of love and betrayal, an appropriate soundtrack for the end of my brief marriage. At the Ames bus station, I gave James all the money I had in my purse. It wasn't much, but he tried to refuse. "It's not necessary, ma'am." "Please, accept it," I insisted, not just for the ride, but for the silence, for the respect. He nodded then, putting the money in his worn shirt pocket. "Where are you going now, ma'am?" "Des Moines. I'm going to start over." With a final thank you, I entered the bus station. I bought a ticket for the next bus. It would leave in an hour. I sat on an uncomfortable plastic bench, the small suitcase between my feet, and waited. Each minute seemed like an eternity, imagining at any moment seeing Mark or Mr. Augustus walking through the doors, coming to get me by force. But no one came. The bus arrived, I boarded, and when it finally began to pull away, I felt something strange, as if an enormous weight were lifted from my shoulders, allowing me to breathe freely for the first time in many hours. I arrived in Des Moines in the late afternoon. The city had never seemed so welcoming, so familiar, so safe as at that moment. I took a taxi directly to Carmen's apartment, the only place where I was sure to be well received without many questions. When she opened the door and saw me, dressed simply, with a small suitcase, swollen eyes from someone who hadn't slept, Carmen simply hugged me. Strong, long, one of those hugs that heal from within. She didn't ask anything, just led me inside, made tea, and waited for me to be ready to talk. And I talked. I told everything. The sick tradition of the Whitmores, Mark's cowardice, my night of terror, my dawn escape. Carmen listened in silence, horror growing in her eyes, her hands occasionally squeezing mine in silent support. "My God, Helena," she said finally when I finished. It's monstrous. We need to report it. Call the police." "And who would believe me?" I replied, bitterness evident in my voice. "The Whitmores are powerful. They have political connections, influential friends. It would be my word against theirs. And in the end, I would just be another hysterical woman making up stories to explain the end of her own marriage." Carmen didn't insist, but I saw in her eyes that she didn't completely agree. That night, I slept on the sofa in her small apartment, lulled by the distant sound of Des Moines traffic, a sound that, surprisingly, brought me comfort after the oppressive quiet of the farm. In the days that followed, I faced what was perhaps the most difficult challenge: telling my parents. I asked Carmen to invite them to her apartment, knowing I would need this neutral ground, this silent support from my friend. When they arrived, the shock on their faces when they saw me there, and not on the honeymoon as they expected, broke my heart. I told an edited version of the truth, that I had discovered something terrible about the Whitmore family, something that made it impossible to continue married. I didn't go into specific details. I couldn't do that to them, especially to my mother. I said only that Mark wasn't the man I thought he was, that his family had traditions I couldn't accept. "But daughter," my father asked, confused, "what will people say in town? What will we tell the neighbors, the relatives?" "Say whatever you want, Dad. That I was the one who gave up, that I wasn't ready, that I got scared. Anything is better than the truth." My mother, always more perceptive, looked at me with something beyond confusion. There was understanding in her eyes, as if she intuited what I wasn't saying. "Whatever you need, my daughter, we'll be here. Always." Life went on somehow. A week later, I returned to the school where I taught. The principal, surprisingly, didn't ask questions when I requested to return earlier than planned, canceling the leave I had requested for the honeymoon. Maybe she saw in my eyes that it was better not to ask. The children, at least, didn't know enough to question. To them, I was just Teacher Helena, the same as always, who read stories with funny voices and knew how to explain math in a way everyone understood. Their innocence, their simple joy, were a balm for my wounded soul. A month passed. Then 2. I began to think I had maybe escaped, that the Whitmores had decided to leave me alone, to forget the crazy teacher who had fled the morning after the wedding. I managed to rent a small apartment in a modest neighborhood, a simple but honest area. I resumed my routine, my classes, my independence. And then, on an afternoon in June, returning from school, I found him waiting at the door of my building. Mark, thinner than I remembered, deep circles under his eyes, a defeated air I had never seen in him before. "Helena," he said simply when I approached, "we need to talk." I thought about ignoring him, walking right past, calling for help, but something in his look, genuine pain, shame that seemed to consume him from within, made me stop. "We have nothing to talk about, Mark. Please, 5 minutes, that's all I ask." I ended up agreeing. We went to a nearby bakery, a public place where I would feel safe. We sat at a table in the back, untouched coffee cups in front of us. "I came to ask for forgiveness," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper. "I know I don't deserve it, that what I did, what I allowed to happen, is unforgivable, but I need you to know how much I regret it." I stayed silent, waiting for him to continue, unable to offer any comfort, any absolution. "After you left, I confronted my father. For the first time in my life, a sad smile appeared on his lips. You should have seen his face when I entered the office and demanded explanations. When I asked how he could do that, how everyone could allow that tradition to continue. And what did he say?" I asked, despite myself, curious about the reaction of the man who had caused me so much fear, so much hatred. "He said what he always says, that I was weak, that I didn't understand what it meant to be a Whitmore, that he was disappointed in me." Mark sighed deeply. But this time, his words didn't have the same effect. For the first time, I saw my father as he really is, not the respected patriarch, the successful businessman, but a tyrant, a predator who hides behind words like tradition and family. I said nothing. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to see some glimpse of the man I had loved. But distrust, pain were still too fresh. "I left home," he continued. "I'm living in Des Moines now, in a small apartment downtown. I found work at an agricultural company. Nothing compared to what I had at the farm, but it's honest, it's mine." "Why are you telling me this, Mark? What do you want from me?" "Nothing," he replied quickly. "I didn't come to ask for a second chance or for you to come back to me. I know that's impossible after what happened. I came to set you free." "Set me free?" He took an envelope from his jacket's inner pocket and placed it on the table. "These are the annulment papers for our marriage. I already signed my part. My lawyer said that since it wasn't consummated, it will be relatively simple. No scandals, no sordid details in the official documents." I looked at the envelope, as if it contained something precious and dangerous at the same time. Official freedom, legal, the formal end of that brief and traumatic chapter of my life. "And your father? Did he allow this?" "I didn't ask for permission, Helena. Not this time." There was a new firmness in his voice, a trace of courage I didn't recognize. "He threatened, of course, said he would disinherit me, that he would destroy me. But I discovered that his threats no longer have power over me. Not now that I've seen the truth." I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight, physical and symbolic, in my hands. "Thank you," I said finally. "Not for what you're doing now, but for at least doing this right." Mark nodded, a sad nod of understanding. "There's one more thing I need to say. After you left, I started talking to other women in the family. My female cousins, my aunts. I asked about the tradition. I felt a knot in my stomach, not wanting to hear more, but knowing I needed to. Some refused to talk. Others cried. One, my cousin Beatrice, told me everything. How she was forced, how no one helped her, how she lives with it to this day." He paused, swallowing with difficulty. "You were right, Helena. It was never a tradition voluntarily accepted. It was abuse, passed from generation to generation, disguised as something normal, something necessary." Silent tears began to stream down my face. Not for me, not anymore, but for all those women. Women who didn't have my courage, or my luck, or my option to flee. Women trapped in a web of power and silence, forced to live daily with their abusers, to smile at Sunday lunches, to pretend nothing had happened. "What are you going to do now?" I asked, wiping away tears. "I'm going to rebuild my life, like you're doing. Away from them, away from that place." He hesitated, then continued. "And I'm going to try to help other women in the family who want to escape. Beatrice is already in contact with me, planning to leave her husband, to get out of my father's orbit." We sat in silence for a few moments, the noise of the bakery around us, orders being shouted, cups clinking, animated conversations. A surreal contrast to the gravity of our conversation. "Goodbye, Helena," Mark said finally, standing up. I hope you find the happiness you deserve." I watched as he left the bakery, a solitary figure who soon got lost in the busy street crowd. I stayed there for a long time, looking at the envelope in front of me, feeling a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Not for Mark, not anymore, but for the young dreamer I had been, for the lost innocence, for the dreams I had nurtured, and that now needed to be replaced by others, more cautious, more realistic. The marriage annulment was granted 3 months later, without complications, without sordid details in the official documents, exactly as Mark had promised. I went back to using my maiden name, Helena Grace Thompson, and continued my life, one day at a time. The year 1970 arrived, bringing new winds, new challenges. The school where I taught closed. Budget cuts, they said. I found employment at another, smaller, more distant one, with lower pay. I moved to an even more modest apartment, cut expenses, learned to live with less. But there was a freedom in that simplicity, a dignity in earning my own living, in owing nothing to anyone, especially to men who demanded submission in exchange for material comfort. At 27, I was a different woman from the young one who had arrived in Des Moines full of romantic dreams. Harder, perhaps, more cautious, certainly, but also stronger, more aware of my own worth. And it was this new Helena who, on a rainy afternoon in May, met the man who would change her life again. But this time, for the better. Much better. It was on a rainy afternoon in May 1970 that my life took a new direction. I was returning from the school where I taught, protecting myself as best I could under an umbrella that insisted on turning inside out with the wind. The rain was falling hard, turning the streets into small streams. While trying to avoid a particularly large puddle, I ended up bumping into someone coming from the opposite direction. "I'm sorry," I said automatically, looking up. That's when I saw him for the first time. A tall man with broad shoulders, dark hair already with some gray strands at the temples. He held a worn leather briefcase against his chest, trying to protect it from the rain, as his umbrella had turned completely inside out. "The fault was mine," he replied, with a deep but gentle voice. I was distracted. We stood there, two strangers soaked in the rain, looking at each other. There was something in his eyes, a deep blue, sincere, that gave me a feeling of safety I hadn't felt for a long time. "Your umbrella," I commented, noticing the structure twisted by the wind. He looked at the ruined object and laughed, a genuine, carefree laugh. It was already in its last days anyway. "I bought it at the farmer's market for 50 cents. Think I got cheated." I couldn't help but smile. "I know a store nearby where they sell good umbrellas. If you want." "I'd love to," he replied promptly, then seemed embarrassed by his own enthusiasm. "I mean, if it's not a bother." So sharing my already precarious umbrella, I took that stranger to the small variety store on the corner of my street. On the way, I discovered his name was Anthony Charles Miller. He was a civil engineer, worked for a construction company nearby, and was visiting a client in the area when the rain caught him. "And you?" he asked, after buying a new umbrella, much more resistant. "Helena Grace Thompson. I'm an elementary teacher at the municipal school in this neighborhood." "Thompson," he repeated thoughtfully. "You look like a Helena Miller." That phrase, said so casually, made me blush like a teenager. After everything I had been through, there I was, a 27-year-old woman, feeling my face heat up because of a casual comment. "I was married before," I said suddenly, not knowing why I felt the need to mention it. "So was I," he replied naturally. "My wife passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry. And your husband?" "It didn't work out," I replied simply. "We separated. We annulled the marriage." He nodded, without asking more questions, something I deeply appreciated. The rain had diminished a bit, and we said goodbye at the corner, each going their way under a new umbrella. I thought I would never see him again, but fate had other plans. The next day, when leaving school, there he was, standing across the street, with the same new umbrella, even though there was no sign of rain in the sky. "Brought it as a precaution," he explained when I approached, a shy smile on his lips. "The radio man said it might rain again." I smiled, realizing the transparent excuse. "And you came to test if it works better than the previous one?" "Actually, I came to ask if you would accept having coffee with me." My first reaction was caution. After the experience with Mark, I had sworn to myself that I would never again let myself be carried away by sweet words or charming smiles. But there was something different about Anthony Charles, a simple honesty, a transparency that intrigued me. "A coffee," I agreed finally. "Just coffee." One coffee turned into two, then into dinner the following week, then into Sunday walks in the park. Anthony Charles was as different from Mark as possible. Less sophisticated, perhaps, but infinitely more authentic. He came from a simple family from rural Minnesota, had built his career with hard work, without connections or privileges. He said what he thought, without games or manipulations. In the first months, I kept all my defenses up. I didn't tell him about what had really happened with my marriage, just said it had been a mistake, a fundamental incompatibility. When he tried to get physically closer, holding my hand for too long, a longer hug, I subtly pulled away. He never forced, never pressured. "You have all the time in the world, Helena," he told me once, after I pulled back when he tried to kiss me for the first time. "I don't know what happened in your past, but I know it left marks. When you're ready, I'll be here." It was that patience, that silent understanding, that finally melted the ice around my heart. 6 months after our first meeting, on a starry night on the porch of his small apartment, I finally let him kiss me. And for the first time since that terrible night at the Whitmore farm, I felt that my body was truly mine again, to give, to share, by my own choice. Our relationship progressed slowly, respectfully. Anthony Charles had a daughter from his first marriage, Maria, an adorable 5-year-old girl who lived with her maternal grandmother. On Sundays, she would come spend the day with her father, and gradually, I began to participate in these meetings. I discovered in myself a tenderness, a capacity to love that I thought had been destroyed forever. It was Maria, with her childish innocence, who inadvertently helped me take the next step in my healing. One Sunday afternoon, while we were making donuts in Anthony Charles's kitchen, she suddenly asked, "Miss Helena, are you going to be my new mommy?" The question caught me off guard. I looked at Anthony Charles, who watched the scene with a mixture of embarrassment and hope. "That's something we need to talk about, Princess," he replied for me. "Miss Helena and I are friends." "But you look at her the same way you looked at Mommy in the photos," the little one insisted, with that insight only children have. "And she gets red-faced when you come close, just like Julia from my class when Peter sits next to her." I couldn't help but laugh, my face really heating up as she had described. That night, after Maria was taken back to her grandmother's house, Anthony Charles and I had our first really serious conversation about the future. "I love you, Helena," he said simply, without flourishes or grand declarations. "I love you exactly as you are, with all your scars, with all your fears. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you, if you'll have me." I took a deep breath, knowing it was time for the truth. "Before I answer, I need to tell you something. Something about my marriage, about why it ended." That night, for the second time in my life, I told the complete story of what had happened at Whitmore Farm. The tradition of the Whitmores, Mark's betrayal, my desperate escape. I spoke without interruptions, the words flowing like a dammed river that finally finds an outlet. When I finished, Anthony Charles's face was pale, his fists clenched with rage. For a terrifying moment, I thought he would get up and leave, unable to deal with the weight of what I had shared. Instead, he knelt in front of me, took my hands in his, and said the words that began to heal my soul. "That man, that family, don't deserve even a minute of your fear, your pain. You survived, Helena. You escaped. And now, if you'll let me, I want to spend every day of the rest of my life showing you what real love is. Respect, partnership, kindness." In that moment, the last walls around my heart crumbled. I cried, not from sadness or trauma, but from relief, from gratitude, from a nascent love that finally had permission to flourish. We married in July 1971 in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, followed by lunch at my mother's house in Cedar Falls. Only close family and a few friends, including Carmen, who cried more than everyone during the ceremony. There was no elaborate wedding dress, no grand party, No displays of wealth or status. Just two people committed to each other, and a little 6-year-old girl throwing rose petals over us when we left the courthouse. Our life together began in a modest apartment. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a kitchen where we could barely fit both of us at the same time. I continued teaching, now at a private school that paid a little better. Anthony Charles was promoted to project manager at the construction company, which gave us a little more financial stability. Maria started staying with us during the week, returning to her grandmother only on weekends. In 1972, I discovered I was pregnant. The news filled me with a mixture of joy and terror. Part of me feared I wouldn't know how to be a mother, that the traumas of the past would somehow interfere with my ability to fully love a child. Anthony Charles, as always, understood without me needing to explain. "You're already the best mother Maria could have," he reminded me, caressing my still flat belly. "Our child will have the same luck." Peter was born in November of that year, a robust baby with pink cheeks and an insatiable hunger. When I put him to my breast for the first time, I felt such overwhelming love that it almost scared me. How could so much love fit inside a human heart? 2 years later came Julia, delicate as a porcelain doll with her father's blue eyes. And in 1977, completing our family, Raphael was born, the mischievous youngest who tested the limits of my patience like no other. The 1970s and 1980s passed in a whirlwind of diapers, school meetings, birthdays, graduations. Anthony Charles eventually opened his own engineering company, small but respected. I stopped teaching full-time when Raphael was born, but continued giving private lessons at home, helping children with learning difficulties. We had our challenges, of course. What family doesn't? There were financial difficulties when Anthony Charles's company almost went bankrupt during the economic crisis of the early 1980s. There were heated discussions about how to raise the children, about priorities, about the future. But never at any moment did I stop feeling respected, valued, loved for who I really was. In 1990, we managed to fulfill an old dream. We bought our own house, with a backyard where we could plant fruit trees, with enough rooms for the whole family, including Maria, who was already in college but still had her space guaranteed with us. It was in that house that we celebrated our children's graduations, engagements, weddings. It was there that we received our first grandchildren, at first just on weekends, later more frequently as we retired and had more time available. Anthony Charles used to say that grandchildren are the reward for not strangling our children during adolescence, a joke that always made me laugh, especially during Peter and Raphael's rebellious phases. Life wasn't perfect. We had our losses, our sorrows. My parents passed away, one after the other, in the early 2000s. Anthony Charles's mother, a tough lady from rural Minnesota who never showed affection openly but always filled the refrigerator when she visited us, passed away in 2005. Friends got sick, some left too early. And then, in 2015, the hardest blow. Anthony Charles was diagnosed with Parkinson's. The disease progressed slowly at first, allowing us to maintain an almost normal life for a few years. But gradually, the tremors worsened, the rigidity increased, mobility decreased. I became his primary caregiver, learning to administer medications, to help him with daily activities that were once automatic, to decipher his needs when speech became more difficult. Our children helped when they could. But they had their own families, their jobs, their lives. It wasn't easy. There were days of despair, nights of silent tears after he fell asleep, but never, not for a moment, did I consider it a burden. It was simply my turn to take care of him, as he had taken care of me so many times throughout our life together. On nights when insomnia tormented him, I stayed awake too, telling stories of our life together, remembering the day we met in the rain, the birth of each of our children, the trips we took when the children were already grown, the first time we saw the ocean together in California, that crazy trip to Yellowstone in our old Chevy that barely made the journey, the cruise we took on our 25th wedding anniversary. "You gave me the life I never knew I could have," he told me one night, his voice trembling, but his blue eyes still vivid, still full of that love that had saved me so many years before. "Every day by your side was a gift, Helena." Anthony Charles passed away on a spring morning in 2020, at home, as he wanted, with all of us around him. I held his hand until his last breath, silently thanking him for the half-century we had together, for the memories we built, for the family we created. The grief was deep, intense, sometimes almost unbearable. But it was also full of gratitude, of celebration for a life well lived, a love well cultivated. And gradually, with the support of the children, grandchildren, friends, I learned to live in this new chapter, alone, but carrying with me everything Anthony Charles taught me about love, strength, and dignity. And so I arrive at my 79 years, looking back with the wisdom that only time can bring. I see the scared young woman who fled from a farm on a cold morning, determined to preserve her dignity at any cost. I see the woman who found true love when she least expected it. I see the mother, grandmother, teacher, wife, caregiver, all the roles I played, all the versions of myself that existed throughout this journey. I know now that that terrible night at Whitmore Farm, although it left scars, didn't define me. It was just one chapter in a much larger, much richer story. A story of resilience, new beginnings, courageous choices. If there's something I've learned in these almost 8 decades of life, it's that we are much more than our worst moments. We are the sum of all our decisions, big and small. We are the loves we choose, the hands we hold in difficult moments, the smiles we share in joys. Today, I live in a smaller house, more suitable for a widowed lady. My children visit me regularly. My grandchildren call me for advice or just to chat. My great-grandchildren fill the house with joy when they come spend afternoons with me. I have my garden, my books, my memories. I have the certainty of a life well lived, despite all obstacles. And I have you, my dear ones, who patiently listened to this story I kept for so long. If it touched your heart in some way, I ask that you leave a like on this video and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. And don't forget to tell me in the comments where you're watching from. This old lady here is curious to know how far my voice is reaching. To you who are watching, from wherever you are, I want to say, no matter what happened in your past, you can always write a new chapter. You can always start over. Life is generous in giving us second chances, if we have the courage to accept them. This old lady here is living proof of that. And if I could find my way back to the light after darkness, you can too. With love, Helena Grace Miller.